my friends? This is Michael. He has been in my life for many years now. He was a leader and a mentor at the previous place where I worked, and we've had epic conversations throughout the years, my friend. We've been able to see each other grow. We've also seen each other take a big leap of faith in the last year or so. I'm really excited to dive into this, kind of get the nuts and bolts of really who you are and how you became who you are, but also just get some good info and value out there for everybody that's listening.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you so much, Tyler. Thanks for having me on. It's been awesome to watch your journey and just cool that you're getting to share your talents in this new format. So thanks for having me.
Yeah. So with that, let's hear a little bit about Michael. Where did Michael, how did this all start? Tell us like where you start. I mean, like I can't even remember where you grew up actually. It was Southeast.
No, actually I grew up outside of the Portland area, just a little bit south as you kind of head to the coast, in between Portland and Salem, Oregon. And, honestly, I grew up lower middle class. My parents are two of the hardest working folks that I've ever met. I'll stack them up against anybody. And so I just learned at a really young age what it meant to put pride into your work. And even if it didn't mean, resulting in a whole lot, just putting in a hard, honest day's work. My dad was in the construction industry and home heating, fuel delivery and the streets of, windy downtown Portland. And so I saw how hard he worked. My mom was always in administrative functions, and we barely squeaked by. I remember one time, and I didn't realize it kind of years later, but we actually were collecting pop cans, and come to find out things were so tight that was actually milk money. And so my parents never had excuses. They always just put their head down and work. But that really has driven me and actually has helped shape my leadership vision, not only in how I lead, but also in how I help instruct others, because I really feel like our foundation is what starts us out, right? It's what sort of carries us and leads us. And so, that's kind of how I got things started out, was in that area, and then moved across the state.
I really do, because like I think back like in my childhood, like my parents pushed me to mow lawns, and that's what led to the entrepreneurial spirit that I have, where it's like I want to go earn it, right? Yeah. And it's cool with the impact that our parents have. I think the older I get, the more, I don't want to say mature, but that's kind of the way it really comes out, is the more mature you are with the impact your parents had on you. Mm-hmm. So it's cool. I mean, I never knew that about you. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's cool. I've got three, I call them, young men now. They're not really boys anymore. I got three boys, they're 18, 17, and 12. The two older two are taller than I am. I come home and they kind of pat me on the head type of thing, this little, patronizing thing, but it's all in fun. And honestly, my goal is to help try to instill that same type of work ethic, because I feel like sometimes it's just kind of missing, if I'm being totally honest. Sometimes in translating that to generation, that was just one piece that was just really important to me. And again, I think has helped carried, me forward and helped me be successful, like you had mentioned before, in those times where you step out or you're just kind of like, how exactly is this going to go? It's relying on your work ethic. And then I really think obviously your faith and your family, right? Like making sure that those three of those things are aligned, just makes a huge difference.
Yeah, totally. And I'm spot on with you. I think work ethic is something that lacks, or is it's very easy to spot now. It used to be like in generations before where it was like everybody did it. And now, I mean, in your previous role where I knew you from, there was turnover like crazy. And you spent a lot of time coaching and training. And I don't know, what are some of those things as you start thinking about building a team, I guess, kind of getting into it? I'm here trying to build a team in North Idaho now, and I'm on a team. And as you think of, I don't know, young entrepreneurs that are building teams, there is turnover. There is work ethic that you got to go find. What are some of the things that you've looked for or has worked for you in the past?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'll say this, everything I've learned, or most of what I've learned that's stuck through my leadership journey, has been through failure. And also, when I started out as a young leader, fast forwarding a little bit from where I moved to Eugene, Oregon, went to school, got married, My firstborn actually was born, Oliver was born on the day that I graduated college. So it was a really quick jump into, the professional world. And having a business management degree and being in my early 20s, I pretty much had it all figured out, right? Or at least that's what I thought. And, I say that to say for a lot of, I think, newer leaders or younger leaders, or maybe if it's just a switch into the industry, realizing number one, that, it's not all about me. And number two, really drilling down into what makes work valuable for the people that you're leading, because it may be about the, job itself, but normally it's something about, a motivation that's much deeper, right? It's time with family, it's development and growth. Maybe it's just even time with the leader to help them really grow in becoming a professional. I notice that a lot in folks who are in these newer generations. There's kind of this underlying current, or maybe even just like overtly, millennials are this or that, or these generations are this or that. My story is, man, every generation wants to be heard and understood and valued. And it may sound a little different than maybe some of the, previous generations, but at the end of the day, how can you as a leader really invest in those people the way that they want to be invested in? Maybe not in the ways that have always traditionally been in play. And I think asking that question of yourself as a leader, and then having really structured, accountable ways to do that, makes a huge difference. Because let's just be honest, as leaders and professionals, we can just get really busy. And so how can you stay on track with that? And so those are some of the things that I've learned along the way that I think make a huge difference.
Yeah, and like just kind of highlighting some things that brought to mind for myself is like, as a leader, a lot of times you just want to jump in and do it, or you just want to tell them how to do it. And you hit something like spot on. Like, you have to know the inner workings of that person and their why and their motivation behind it. Because if you don't do that, then you're not going to be able to lead them or coach them. And I think that's something, as a young leader or even a young business owner, you have to realize that people are buying into that, not buying into, say, the how or the product. Like, they're actually buying into the individual. And that's where the emotions come to. That's where it actually sticks. That's where relationships are built. And I think you're spot on there. I laugh because I think all of us, when we graduate college, think we know exactly what we're going to do for the rest of the life. And I think I've had 5 different jobs since I've graduated college.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
and they're all led to where I am now. But it's having that little bit of humble pie along the way and actually learning it the hard way that I feel like helps you lead or coach, just one level up from where you used to be. And I love what you said there. It was great.
Yeah, no, I definitely would agree with that. And I think, it's number one, knowing your people, right? Knowing, like you said, what makes them tick, what motivates them, what's really important to them, which takes time. But you touched on something too, I think, especially for, maybe you have a team, maybe you're just, so kind of running solo with your own, endeavors, or your entrepreneur, whatever it is, right? It's so easy to kind of have this hero syndrome where you just put on the cape and you just run and do that. And as you grow over time, especially as you have great people around you, it's really easy to continue that habit and that behavior and become really like a lot of tunnel vision, and you become too entrenched in the day to day. And you become too entrenched in, oh, there's this fire. Who's the only one who could put it out? Oh, well, it's me. And that's what I see a lot of times with leaders is, number one, not giving themselves time to slow down and be able to have the bigger picture, to not feel guilty for taking time to invest not only in themselves, but really in their teams, because it doesn't feel as productive as if they would just jump in and do it, or maybe it would take longer, those types of things. And you can only do that for so long, right? Burnout's going to happen. You're going to lose good people. There's a lot of symptoms that come through that. And so that's a lot of what I tend to focus on as well with leaders is, man, how can you really make this scalable for you and for the people that you lead? So it's not only enjoyable, but you're helping them grow as well, not just stay stuck doing the day-to-day or stay stuck in the weeds, which is it's just really common. So
I love that, because you're totally right. Like, we totally do put on the cape and we're like, sweet, man, I'm just going to go make this happen. It's like, I know how to do this and let's go. But like, if you think about scalability and just thinking of how to scale, I recently just went back and read 7 Habits of Successful People. by Steve Covey. And it's
Yep.
funny because like I realize how much that book taught me years ago. That's like almost in my subconscious. And so like when he's talking about the quadrants and how we respect our priorities and our principles, it's funny. I've always adapted the mornings be that like hustle and bustle, very regiment. Like I got to do X, Y, and Z in the morning, and then the afternoon be very reactive, right? And since since reading that recently, I've realized like, wow, like spot on. Like I'm almost like a machine robot hero cape, like you just said, in the mornings. And on the afternoons, if someone calls me, I'm able to go like be on the phone and just walk around and actually have almost like an intimate type conversation because I actually put the time or the effort in my mind that that's what I do in the afternoons. And like, it's funny to think about that in leadership, right? Because we sometimes, I think all of us are leaders. We sometimes have that robotic type framing when we go to manage or lead people. And then we have this other time where it's like, I don't care how long we got to talk now. Let's dive into the weeds here and let's get the value out of it and let's see what you got to do. And you have to teeter totter and balance both. But you obviously manage a lot more people than I ever have in my past. And what are some of the things that's helped you kind of manage that, right? Like you got the day-to-day task, but you also have, hey, I got to invest and care about my people.
Yeah, yeah. With my journey, jumping into kind of fast forwarding a little bit, I got an opportunity to work at Starbucks for about 5 years and lead teams and grow in those areas. And then for one of the largest credit unions in the nation and move, throughout, the whole state of Idaho, lots of different regions, lots of different leaders. And to your point, you kind of start seeing patterns. You start seeing obviously what works, but you also see, gosh, that didn't work. And I think, a couple of things that are just real practical for me personally is number one, I can't stop growing myself. That I can only lead and I can only grow to the capacity that I have invested in myself. And so there's always plateaus that leaders hit, whether they're just starting out or maybe they're building a small team and then they want to scale to a larger team, whatever that could look like. For any of our listeners, I just want to encourage you that there's always another level to take, but it's always going to be requiring you personally as a leader to grow. What does that look like? And just for me personally, I'm always listening to podcasts. I'm always reading books. I'm always trying to improve myself. And then also seeing, well, what are some of my blind spots? I have people in my life. I've always had mentors. I have coaches. Like I have people personally for me to help point those areas out so that I can address those and fix them. Because I'm sure you're the same way, Tyler. Like you may go along and you may just, do what you do. And then you hit this wall and you're like, gosh, why am I hitting this wall? Why can't I get any further? And even just, there's just one example, one leader that I'm helping currently. She had 15,000 emails in her inbox, right? And I'm not talking about like one of those extra burner emails that you just send to people, because you don't want them to like spamming you or you use it for the membership sign up or whatever. Like this was her day-to-day email. And she's just like, I hate being in my inbox. I hate even opening up email. I feel completely chaotic. I feel out of control, right? And we all have different areas. It may not be that to that level, but we all have different areas that need to be addressed. Could be with our work lives. It could be something with a system. Might even be a relationship. A lot of times it's health related. What are some of those areas, and what's one thing that you can get freedom in to help you become not only a better leader but a better version of yourself? And that's what I find is that if somebody's continually or habitually stuck in an area, how do we break through that? Because then everything, you start getting freedom in all these other areas. It's like, it shouldn't seem connected, but it totally is. I don't know if that's been your experience, but that's what I love doing with other leaders is helping them, have some freedom and have some systems in place for sure to help them lead, but just to be a higher version of themselves so that they have more capacity so they can do more and be more and serve at that higher level.
It's funny you say that because that's been like the last 3 months of my life is narrowing down a process, right? Because in mortgages or in sales, we have to have scripts or we have to have a process of sales and we have to have a process of just processing. Like, how do we process to the finish line? And that's really what I do all day, right? Is I take someone in and I liken it to the analogy of going on a flight. I basically perform TSA in the beginning and I do credit checks and income and all that stuff. get them to the gatekeeper, who's the real estate agent. We put them on the plane after they get under contract with the house, and they get all this anxiety and fear, and then put them up there, and then we hit altitude, and I say, cool, I'll talk to you when the appraisal gets here. And the appraisal gets here, and we descend and we close, right? And you have to think about that. And in terms of the loan process, is just like a flight, like a captain or whatever. Like there's a system that we have to follow in order to make it scalable. And you're talking about different leaders, and we all have weaknesses and talents. And I've thought a lot about the parable of the talent, right? Where if we're given talents, we have to polish them and give them out in order to duplicate them, or, that's what they're given for. And like, it's been wicked fun for me because I have a talent with video and marketing. That's what I went to school for, and I have a past in that. And like the energy and the momentum that I get from doing things like this or sharing my talents with other people, it's epic. It feeds off of me. I hope they can feel it too. But I think that's the key with leaders. Is I've also realized throughout that I'll be honest, I hate editing now. I used to love editing. I know your boys love doing some of that behind the scenes thing like we've talked about. Right. I don't want to do that anymore. So if that's a pain point for me, how do I release that pain point and trust it in someone else? And luckily I found someone to where they can crank out the volume and I can just do what I'm good at. But that's those plateaus where you kind of have to go get hard and raw and with yourself and go, I can't do that anymore. If I want to grow, I have to give it off to someone else and let it go.
Yeah.
That's tough.
That's so tough. So, yeah. Because sometimes we just hold on to those things because you're really good at it. Like you're really good at editing. You're really good at video. I mean, I'm sure you could do all those things all day long. And as time moves on, you kind of have this higher vision, and there's nothing wrong with those things, but you're like, now it's time to pivot, right? It's time to do something else. And so it's really good.
So recently, you made a big jump. I made a big jump. Tell me more about your big jump. And if it's probably like mine, where there was months that led into that, but kind of tell me what happened behind the scenes, the nuts and bolts of what was going on in Michael's mind and what he wanted to do to kind of elevate, right?
Yeah, no, great question. So, I got to work at Idaho Central Credit Union for 13 years, learned so much, just grew a ton. And it started as a manager and then a regional manager and then a vice president, and really got to oversee so much of the branch side, which really for me kind of fell into three buckets, which is culture, service, and sales. And just got to learn in part how to lead and how to be really successful and win awards and, have these amazing leaders that could grow. But also from that, I was like, gosh, this is kind of what works best for me, or this is how I'm developing leaders in my own take and spin on it. And so it was probably about 2.5 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, I had a conversation with my wife, which I always say your spouse hopefully is and should be like your best mirror, your best person, your best, accountability partner. And also like, hey, what about this? And so that's what she did. She was just like, well, hey, what if you did what you do with Idaho Central, but just for other businesses? And I'll just be totally honest with you. When I heard that from her, I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. Like, I love what I'm doing. I'm kind of comfortable. I kind of know, I kind of have my systems, and I don't know if you're this way too, Tyler, and I know a little bit of your story and your journey, but you just kind of feel like if, a person of faith, you just kind of feel like God keeps bringing it up, or he keeps bringing up, circumstances or situations, just ideas where you're kind of like, yeah, well, maybe, and I'm gonna call them those shower moments where you're just kind of like self-reflective, or
louder as you go.
What's that?
The volume gets louder and louder as you go on too. Like he's just always there, just kind of flash, turning up the volume.
Totally, it's almost like you can't ignore it, right? And so, that's what it was for me. So just over time, just kind of built. And I found myself kind of wanting things to go poorly in a sense, if that sounds, maybe kind of similar or funny, where I'm just like, oh yeah, I wish that they would, do something really bad. And so then I can just leave, because I felt this tension. And honestly, I left on really good terms. I still have great relationships. I love the time that I had there. And I just felt called to do something more, which was take what I've learned and really help leaders and business owners amplify the very best parts of what they do, right? Help them grow in their culture and their sales and their service. But there's so many great leaders who just aren't where they want to be in those areas, or they feel like they're doing good, but they really want to be great. They want to be known as world class, or maybe they're struggling in a certain area and they really know that there's a next level for them to hit. And so I feel very fortunate to do that for lots of businesses and transitioned into starting my own consulting practice. And it's been over a year and a half now fully doing it. I had taken on some clients before I transitioned, but gosh, it's just, I loved what I did. And now it's just like a whole different world, right? It's just like, and I'm sure you're very similar in this way, where it's like, man, you're thankful and appreciative for what you had. And now you get to see this other side where you're like, man, I'm kind of being able to use parts of me, or be able to, just help in some new ways above and beyond what I was even able to do. And I just absolutely love it. I get up every morning, so excited to support the clients that I have, and also know there's new people coming who I'm going to be able to support as well in some of those ways. And so I'm sure you're probably pretty similar, where you're kind of like, man, this is good, but gosh, now I can hit these different gears, right? I can go to some of these different levels.
Yeah, it's really the compound effect, right? Like every experience that you or I have had in our careers has led up to this point where it gave us enough confidence to actually move forward, right? So I think about from mowing lawns to knocking doors to getting a photography business going, to working as like a marketer in door-to-door sales, to then reaching a loan officer not knowing anything at Idaho Central and scaling very quickly in 5 years. That led to, well, I know how to build a brand. I know how to build this personal experience for Tyler. I've done it before. Let's combine all these things together and make this something that I feel is cohesive for myself. Just like you're saying, like, hey, I've been able to perfect almost a process or system, and I want to share it with others. And I can do that by simply going out on my own and taking a little bit of risk and getting uncomfortable, because when I'm uncomfortable, I push myself and I actually grow. And that's what's cool. That's what I admire about individuals like yourself, where it was pretty comfortable where we were before, but that's not enough, right? And I think that's the key when you start looking into talented salesmen or, leadership in any role. It's all about getting uncomfortable, because that's where you truly grow. And you're going to fail, but when was the last time you were uncomfortable? And for me, that's like flip every day right now.
Right. Yeah, I bet.
What has been like some big mentors? Has there been mentors or teachers in your life that's really impacted you or helped you grow, that's made a difference in, I don't know, the Michael of who you are today? Obviously, your wife's one of them, but
yeah, definitely my wife. I mentioned my parents and their work ethic for sure. I also say Rick Cartwright, where, I touched on Starbucks, but, my move to Starbucks before that, I actually crashed and burned in an insurance or a commission-only insurance sales job that I was completely unprepared for, had no safety net, was super cocky, just had a bunch of issues. And so when I stepped into that management role specifically, I remember, walking into a Starbucks and talking to Rick Cartwright, and he had said, Michael, I don't know you really well, but I think I see something in you at this moment that you don't quite see in yourself. And, so that stuck with me. And then also just, I'd like to teach you how I manage and how I lead, because I think there might be a different way than how you've been doing things. And those two things really stuck with me. And he did that, with a lot of compassion, a lot of heart. He was hard on me too, and really helped me grow as a leader. And I've had so many mentors along the way. I think that's actually one of the biggest traps that leaders and entrepreneurs can fall into. And it's sort of this twist on this American mindset, which I'm full-blooded American. I love America, but sometimes this independent mindset where it's like, oh, I'll just pull myself up by the bootstraps, or I should be able to do all these things on my own. And I've never met a successful leader long-term or a successful business owner long-term who doesn't have people in their corner, who don't have people who can help them not only maybe move past a barrier, but who are there for them, maybe will tell them the truth that nobody else will tell them, right? Like are really helping them grow long term. People who just try to do it solo, you can do that for a while. It's just really hard to maintain that. And so that's been part of my story, is having amazing people along the way, and being vulnerable in those areas too, right? Where there are areas that I need to grow in, or maybe I've totally made a huge mistake in how I'm leading, or some of those other areas that are really important to me, and having those folks in my corner, and having those mentors and coaches and leaders, honestly, it's just made all the difference. So yeah. How about for you, Tyler?
I think you're right. I think it's really having accountability partners. So I remember a podcast from years ago that said you need a friend, a coach, and a mentor in your life. And I think our wives fall into all three categories at different times in our lives. But a mentor is, you're in the consulting business, and you know that sometimes there's a almost diluted coaching term out there. Like, I'm a coach, or I'm a personal coach, or I'm a life coach. But like, you yourself you have the credibility, and you've actually went through a lot of different programs and a lot of different teaching and leadership. And I think with mentors for myself, so now that I've jumped out, I've actually went and sought after the top of the top, right? Like, hey, pick out what I'm doing here. Hey, my golf swing, I need a golf coach. Like, if I want to actually get better, I'm going to do that. And you start looking at some of those aspects of your life. And the only way you can keep yourself accountable is to find someone that's actually a little bit better than you, or a lot better than you, and can pull you. And I really like the term, like, you can lead me to the water and I'll go independent on you, like you mentioned before. But now I'm starting to realize that efficiency and the return on my investment, or return on my time, is huge. So if I'm talking to a guy like you, and it's like, just like your analogy that you used of the emails, like, you're probably like, hey, I can teach you something really quick with emails, and I'll save you tons of time, and it'll save you that anxiety. But if she didn't get vulnerable with you or share that with you, there's no way you could have coached her on that to actually make that impact. And now getting to a point in my career or where I'm at, I need that. Okay, if I've been able to get to X amount of volume every single year, I've hit this many units every year. If I want to go up just a little bit more, I have to be able to get vulnerable and share, hey, this is what I'm not good at. Can you help me? Or this is what I'm good at, but can I make it to where that time is a little bit more efficient so I'm not wasting time? And time's huge. I think that's the problem with entrepreneurs or even salesmen. Like, I remember knocking doors, and I could go knock 100 doors in a day. And then you'd find me on my iPad on the corner watching a video. And then I'm like, cool, I'll just go knock this other door, right? Like, efficiency is something to get like a return on the investment. And that's hard, because we feel like if we're in our cockpit, like our desk, I'm working. But are you truly working? Are you truly making, what you do for a living go forward, inch forward?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's really good.
No. Yeah, no, it just brings to mind two different frameworks, things that I help folks on, and you touched right on it, right, with the example that I brought earlier, in regards to email. And I call it the ABCs. So it's assess, build, and commit. Right. So you can assess the situation. Oh, hey, I'll just use this example again. Hey, I've got 15,000 emails, and I really hate emails, and I struggle on it. I don't have a great system. I don't get back to things in a timely manner. Right. That would be the A. The B is building. Okay, well, how do I want to fix that? Right. What are some ideas? How can I help structure something that maybe not work for everybody, but it would work for me, knowing my own bents, my own strengths, my own talents, right? And then the last one is that commit. And that's the hardest one. And that's typically the one that doesn't have a lot of focus and attention, but who are you going to be accountable to? How can you be accountable to yourself and the commitments that you make to yourself? How can you honor your own word? And then how can you have that built in? Because it's super easy to know a problem, and it's really easy to search online and find some sort of solution. The real power is in, how do I commit to it? And who do I have in my corner to help maybe hold me accountable in those areas? Or maybe it's growth, like you had mentioned, so that I can build up those habits, and then I can move forward, and it feels natural, right? It feels like, hey, this is something that I've conquered. So that's one piece. And then I would also say when it comes to some of these areas that you're talking about, whether it's sales or whether it's leadership or any of those things, for me, as I dissected, man, what worked? What really, really worked when I was, leading folks. And then as I've moved into working with my clients, and it's a 3-step process. It works every single time. And it's motivate, track, and celebrate, right? So what's the motivation? Why are we doing what we're doing? Why is it important to that person? Why is it important to me? How do I track it? How's it visible? How can I know what behaviors really lead to those results? And then how am I going to celebrate it? How do I not move past the win? Even if the win is, to your point earlier, knocking on doors, right? Or even if the win is, hey, I may have taken over 12 things today, but I handed off at least one. If you're a leader, right? And I help delegate this, or I help spend time with this person. So those small, consistent wins and tracking those are so much more helpful than a lot of times some of the self-sabotaging behaviors that we can have. Distracting ourselves with our phones, or maybe doing some other things that really don't move us forward. And so when you're talking about those those areas, I was like, gosh, I want to make sure that I get to share those with your listeners, because those have been really powerful for me personally as well.
I think that's perfect and it's spot on. And the one question I have, I don't know if I'm being real with myself, I've had this problem like throughout my life. Like, I know whether I'm talented or good at my job or whatever I'm doing. Like, for instance, door to doors, you usually go out in a car. All of you are carpooling, and you get dropped off in the area you're going to go knock, right? And before you open up that door, you're like, oh my gosh, can't believe I'm doing this again, right? It doesn't matter how many days, how many years. I don't know. I feel like everybody has. It's the same with loans, right? Like, as a loan officer, every Monday when I sit down, I'm like, oh man, here we go. I got to make, 100 calls before noon, or I got to answer all these emails. And I've really found that, like, you're right. If you break down the task and you start working and you start doing the hard things and eat your frog and all these other things that we hear about, the beauty really comes in the drive of just showing up and being consistent in how you show up. You may be 5 minutes late, but you showed up. And I think a lot of times we can get passive with ourselves where, oh my gosh, I have all these emails, or I got to go knock doors, or I got to start making phone calls and pounding the phones. And the beauty is you just got to get up and do it, because the first one may not be great, but by call number 30 or by door number 5, you're back in the flow, and you've already taken on what you need to take on, and you got call it your Superman cape on, and you're going to make it happen. But I find that it took me a lot of years to realize, stop delaying that procrastination and just show up and do it. Put it in your calendar and just be accountable with yourself. And if you're not accountable with yourself, find somebody that will keep you accountable. And it's funny, I have 3 friends, and 2 of them are loan officers. And by noon on Monday, just randomly, we'll text each other, hey, got like 2 contracts today. What about you? And it just fires you up. It keeps you accountable, right? Like, it's just a subtle way of like, hey, I'm in the trenches with you. Let's make this happen. Mm-hmm. And, being as a leader that you have been, and, consulting, you probably see that a lot with different people that come into your life, where they'll get the ball rolling and then like the momentum stops. And like, how do you show up to get the momentum happening again? And they probably almost call you right when that happens. And you probably have a lot of experience, right? Where you're like, hey, let me help you get the momentum back, because you actually know how to do this. Mm-hmm. Give us some insight, Michael, on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's typically 2 different things that happen, right? Or aren't happening, and one of them is disconnecting from why they started in the first place, right? And in both you and I have similar stories, and I'm sure a lot of folks listening have this as well, where we're doing what we're doing more than for just a paycheck, right? Like, we love serving people. We know that we have gifts and talents. Like, once that gets jaded or disconnected, or we feel overwhelmed or stressed, or whatever that may be, we start losing that love for the work that we get to do, right? The fact that we get to serve. And so sometimes it's in that area. And how can you reconnect with that? To be totally honest, a lot of times it's like, man, can you just take a break? Can you just turn off your phone for a minute, right? Even if they're in procrastination mode, because everybody at some point hits their limit and hits their wall. And I find a lot of times people don't have great systems, so it's always feast or famine, or they just can feel very overwhelmed. How can you reconnect a little bit with yourself and your purpose and why you do what you do? And how can you start to love that again? Because that's the real engine, that's the real motivator longer term. And then the second one is sometimes that love is still in place. They still love what they do, but they've gotten kind of lazy, right? And we can all fall into this trap. Hey, I've had these referrals, or I've had this business, or I'm not knocking doors, like I know I should, or not connecting with people because I've already had all this business, right? So I've got to spend all my time servicing this business. Or, if you're starting out, maybe it's always getting ready to get ready, right? It's always setting up. It's always the systems. It's always that. Instead of, oh, well, what are the habits that I know really help me? If I'm connecting with X amount of people per day, I'm loving on them, I'm caring for them. If you have a team, how often are you connecting with your people? Of course, about work, but also just to connect with them as humans. Hey, I'm just checking in on you. I know you said you were doing this last weekend. Tell me a little bit more about that, right? Like making that the priority when you have your behaviors set that lead to success, and you have your mission set and you're staying focused on that. Those are the two areas that I help either align or realign. And then I'd say the final piece is just making sure, kind of like we touched on, making sure you're not wearing all the hats, right? Making sure you're delegating as you need to, making sure that you're finding balance and making sure that there's joy there, because it's really easy for leaders and business owners and all of us to get overwhelmed just by life's pressures. So how do I make sure that I have joy that's infused in every day that I'm working, right? Everything that I do. Because if that's there, then it's sustainable and it's long term. If you don't, then you can run real hard for a certain amount of time, but that burnout or the lack of success or some of those things can come into play. So those are a couple of the different areas I would say have been really helpful for me personally, and for a lot of the leaders I help as well.
It's so good. Like, this has been so fun talking to you today, Mike. Like, it's been so good. There's so much insight. There's little nuggets that I'm sitting here going, man, I need to go fine tune that myself. Where do people find you? How do they reach out to you? Are you looking for more business? Tell us a little bit about that before we wrap up here. How do they find you, and what can we do to get you some more clients, my friend?
Yeah, I sure appreciate that. Yeah, I love really helping heart-driven leaders who really, again, are focused on how do I provide the best culture? How do I provide the best service to those that I lead? And then by doing those things really, really well, they know that the sales come through that. And so those are the areas that I love. Really, teams, a lot of the folks that I work with have teams so that they can help really spread that influence. But you can find me at michaelwoolston.com. I'm on all the socials except for Twitter. I haven't done the Twitter thing yet. I don't know. That's not an anti-Elon thing. I just never really got into it, but I'm pretty much on everything else. And then you can find some free resources there for yourself or your teams, and just helping your team and your culture grow. So,
well, thank you so much, Michael, for joining me and giving me some of your time and your insight. Again, you've always been a light in my life, and I've always appreciated being around you and talking with you. I always grab something of value every time I talk to you. So I appreciate you jumping on.